This video is sponsored by Rule of Chaos, now on Kickstarter.
To be fair, like, you can still do this stuff. It's just that players aren't used to doing it anymore. GMs aren't used to it coming up as much, but there's no reason why you couldn't take these lessons from previous editions of the game and other OSR games and bring them forward into your 5e D&D game. And, because really it's a way of playing more than it's a rule set.
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave.
Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds. All right, so what are we talking about today, Dave?
So we were shooting a video, and I don't even remember what the video was, but like I think you had made an offhand comment about how you used to just start in a dungeon and there was less role playing. And I was like, well, I don't actually know that that's entirely true. That those early games were more combat intensive than more modern role playing. It can certainly be true, but I think there's like a lot more nuance to that, and I thought it'd be fun to get into it and talk about how OD&D and OSR games kind of because they're basically like D&D on hard mode, how they really facilitate problem solving and in some cases role playing as well.
So let's get into the nitty gritty with those particular topics and how we feel like this can help out the general play out there.
All right, so a lot of those games, for one, unlike D&D, there isn't like a race and a class. There's less options. Usually you just have like your class, your profession. Maybe aspects of that is even your race. It could, in some instances you were playing an elf or a dwarf, right? And you didn't have a class per se. So all of that really boiled down to was you just had less things on your character sheet as far as features, abilities to work with.
And those things really do allow you to get into the game that much faster because it's going to allow character creation to go more quickly and more smoothly.
Well, it's not just that, though. It's when you're actually playing the game and you get into it. Like, the answer to your problem probably isn't on your character sheet, right? So it requires you, the player, to think about how you're going to address this problem and overcome it, right? You might, there's some abilities, right, but not like now where it's like a whole plethora of choices and options to choose from. So as a player, you're going to look at all of those first. In a lot of instances, like you didn't have skills and proficiencies. You have equipment and the little bit of abilities you had and whatever wit you had as a player.
A lot of times when you've got a puzzle or a problem that's in a dungeon, it's like, oh, can I make an investigation check? Can I do a religion or an arcana that might either just straight up solve it or give you a hint, depending upon what the DM wants to do. And there have been a lot of times that it's like, all right, no, you just need to solve what's here. You as the player, not you as the character, have to overcome this. And there's a lot of people that really struggle with that kind of aspect of it.
Another thing was, like, there's a reason why adventurers used to always carry the 10-foot pole. Your equipment meant something different in earlier games, and because it was one of the things that was the most mutable on your character sheet, would change the most, and, didn't necessarily have any specific attributes assigned to it. It's like you have a shovel. Well, everyone knows what a shovel is and what it does. The question is, how are you going to use it in whatever you're doing, right? Like back in those days, if you're playing, if you have a room and the floor is covered with spiders or scorpions or something, and the player has a shovel, they might be like, hey, can I use my shovel to kind of like shovel them out of the way and kind of make a walk through them instead of just having to squish them or figure out a way around? Or I have a rope and a grappling hook. Can I rig something up so I can scurry across and not touch the floor? Like, you as the player had to figure out what to do with that equipment. And, and a lot of times GMs and dungeon masters were also much more open to like creative solutions. I'm not saying they're not now, but like that's all you really had in those games.
And there are times that you have to get creative with, well, there's a trap here. Maybe you don't know how to disarm it or what have you, but it's like, all right, well, it's a pressure plate. If I slip my shovel underneath of it, it can't go down because the shovel is stopping it from moving downward. And any of that kind of stuff, it does allow for, as you said, more creative thinking and more creative problem solving. And that's an aspect of the game that I feel like a lot of people really did enjoy, that you were tested as a thinker to get through some of these things.
And it also really leans into the exploration pillar of D&D as well, because, in those games, there weren't features or abilities that kind of just let you bypass it. Like now you're playing a background like the Outcast, where it's like, oh, I just don't worry about food and water and survival. I just do that. Mm-hmm. Or, a lot of the Ranger features in the original Player's Handbook version where they just let you bypass obstacles.
Sure. And I mean, look at, the sequence of play now. When equipment mattered more, making sure that you had food and water, making sure that you had, your munitions, your ammunition for all of your weapons. Heck, you might even have to if you don't have a whetstone to upkeep your equipment, there could be problems, here, there, what have you. So I definitely know I've played plenty of games where equipment was damaged, destroyed, missing, and that was an aspect of, how the game was played. And now, not a lot of gamers that I talk to are interested in playing that particular style.
Yeah. And, that pressure plate you're talking about, that's what the 10-foot pole was there for, was tapping the ground in front of you because you're looking for traps, you're trying to trigger them before you get to them, and that kind of thing as well. And, to be fair, you can still do this stuff. It's just that players aren't used to doing it anymore. GMs aren't used to it coming up as much, but there's no reason why you couldn't take these lessons from previous editions of the game and other OSR games and bring them forward into your 5e D&D game. And, because really it's a way of playing more than it's a rule set.
Sure. And I mean, there's plenty of tips and tricks that are out there. The 10-foot pole to tap on things, rolling ball bearings or copper coins, down to see whether there's anything that, triggers in that direction. Whether it be okay, well, I'm going to, stay low to the floor, or I'm going to try to climb up on the ceiling so that, spike traps aren't going to spring up on me. There's so many different ways to kind of get around these standard traps that, are a lot of fun to, really muck around and play with. So why not?
So now we kind of get into the aspect of role-playing, because we talked about problem solving a lot so far, but we haven't really addressed role-playing. But here's where it really comes into play. 2 words: unbalanced encounters.
All right, so why don't you define that for, those watching in case they're not familiar with that?
So with the start of 3rd edition, everything was codified much better. And you could expect to face a challenge that was appropriate to your character level. It was designed that way. Mm-hmm. Previous to that, that's not how things generally worked. They could, but not always. And also, you had random encounter tables, right? Where the GM would just be like, you're in a forest. This is what lives in the forest or travels through the forest. I roll my die. Well, it looks like it's a couple of forest giants, because the 3rd giant, it's a forest. And you've just encountered them. What, you're only 1st level? Not my problem. Well, how does this facilitate role-playing? Wait, I'll tell you how. If you try and fight these giants at 1st level, you become paste.
You're going to die. So, this is entirely, possible of, using your skill set as a player, of rationalizing what this is, looking at it from a logic perspective. I'm a 1st level character. DM has put giants in my path. I have to, beg, grovel, run away, do whatever I have to do in order to live. And, those aspects of the game are something that, I haven't seen an encounter that was so grossly overpowering in a while that it wasn't something that oh, I should consider this. I was recently at D&D in a castle, and I put an encounter that I thought, okay, this might be tough. It was probably doable, without out and out killing any of the party, but it could have dropped some of them. And because the players themselves weren't overly familiar with what it was that was described and put on the board, and it was incorporated with a horde itself, they were like, nah, we're just going to talk. And they just, 1 out of the 6 players was, itching for a fight. But he was not going to push the others in that direction, but, man, he wanted to.
Yeah, so, and it can go the other way too. Like, the party encounters a lone goblin or a lone kobold that they can easily defeat. So do they just murder this thing outright, or do they talk to it? Because it is probably not going to try and fight them. It's going to try and run away. It's going to do the groveling, the begging, the pleading, the negotiating in order to try and save its life.
And that's the fun aspect that, D&D really is able to bring to the table. The ability to look at things that, you can have a character set that can meet something that's so grossly overpowering that they have to, like, kowtow to it, but then they're far enough along that path that they can counter something that is so far below them that it has to kind of do the same thing. And that's one of the things that really draws and makes me love this game so much.
All right, so I would say one of the biggest differences between modern gaming and how we used to game back in the day. Back in the game, the players existed in a world where today the players generally exist in a world that is more tailored to them. And the difference is like you just have the campaign, the setting, and it is the way it is, and it has nothing to do with the players. The players can affect it and make changes and build stories in there, but it's not about the player's narrative. It's just about, like, the narrative that you can pull out of the existing world, and hence that's why you'd have those random encounters that were grossly unbalanced. But, interesting things could come from that because you had to figure out how to solve the problem, how to sneak past the threat or negotiate with the threat, as opposed to just fighting the threat.
If you take it from the aspect of a novel, the current way of doing things, the characters in an adventuring party are larger than life. Very quickly are they going to establish, fame, fortune, and are apart from everything else that's going on. They achieve grand status in their actions and deeds and possibly gain notoriety that is going to be foretold for generations to come. Whereas in the older style of gaming, you might exist in stories and what have you, but you were part of a larger world. Regardless of how powerful you became, there were things that were always going to be larger threats, looming out there, because deities could literally walk the earth. You had, numerous dragons and elder beings that all pretty much, were looking down upon this world in some way, shape, or form. And your characters were going to carve their story out of a section of this world, not encompass the world.
I believe in Dragonlance, the maximum level was 18th for anyone, because once you achieve that, you would be removed from the world, right? And I feel like there were maybe some other settings that had similar rules like that as well. So the difference in plays of style is, one is you exist in a world, the other is the world kind of revolves around you. And look, I'm not here to say one is right or wrong. They're both viable ways of playing the game. They just have different outcomes. And I think there's some valuable lessons that we can garner from the old school way of doing things that could be, can be more interesting. It is a little trickier because you have to kind of retrain players a little bit to understand that, maybe this isn't a thing for you to fight. So you're going to have to solve this problem some other way.
I think every once in a while it's important to humble the players to make them realize that their characters are not always going to encounter a threat that is equal to their level or lower, and that some things are going to have to be, negotiated on or, literally run from. I know that I was getting used to I play D&D and my encounters are always, done in such a way that we defeat the threats that are there. And reading Lord of the Rings where they were running all the time was like, man, this is just not as exciting as playing D&D. It was a training scenario to be like, oh, well, what can be said about how Tolkien presented things? Those characters existed in that world, and the threats were greater until they got to a point where it was too much and they had to fight. They had to do something. So, that's my takeaway is, you need to be able to have both in order to really have an amazing story.
Yeah, so there's definitely value to both. Before we go, let us introduce you to the sponsor of this video once again, now on Kickstarter. Rule of Chaos, Demonic 5e. 6 playable demon races, 10 demonic reimagined classes, 30 demonic subclasses, 30 plus infernal magic items, 20 plus monsters and monster templates, new feats, backgrounds, and much, much more.
So why demons? It's a completely new way to play 5e. And here are 3 reasons to break it down. Feel powerful. Normal people will flee if they don't know what's good for them. You wield power they can only dream of or fear dreaming of. Be unique. As an eternal manifestations of chaos, you exist outside of biological, physical, and social norms and expectations. Look like you want, be what you want, and achieve what you want. Unlocking 5e potential, experience adventures from a different perspective and face new challenges. Power is not an obstacle, but choosing when and how you'll use it will have a great impact on the story. Also, you may not always agree with your summoner or other forces that dare controlling you.
That's now on Kickstarter. There is a link up here and down in the description below. Now, let us know what you think about, learning lessons from OD&D, old school Dungeons and Dragons, the OSR, and how you would implement them in your game, and share your thoughts and ideas in the comments below with the rest of the Nerdarchy community.
If you want to help Nerdarchy appease that YouTube algorithm, go ahead and like, share, subscribe. Go ahead and click on that notification bell. You know you want to.
Quick reminder, we drop new Nerdarchy videos 2 to 3 times a week, so come on back. But you can't wait till then, we've got you covered. Speaking of OSR games, Vastgrim RPGs and OSR Morkborg sci-fi horror hack, and you can check it out up here.
So until next time,
Stay nerdy.